Welcome to Humble Beginnings, a podcast where we uncover the unconventional, more relatable paths to success. In this show, we'll share the stories before the C-suites, board memberships, and appointments, the stories of various upbringings, first jobs, career pivots, educational uncertainties, and more. This is the place to hear about their lives from the GovCon executives themselves. We hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Humble Beginnings. I'm your host, Amanda Zieta, and our guest today is Shannon Miller. She's an Executive Vice President and President of the Global Divergent Solutions business at Jacobs. Thank you so much for being here today, Shannon.
Yeah, great to be with you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Shannon, I know that you grew up in a small town in Western Colorado, and I understand you moved around quite a bit. So tell us what that experience was like growing up and a bit about your family.
Yeah, so as you said, I grew up in a small little town in the mountains called Ouray, Colorado. It's actually known for ice climbing, but we were there because my father was in the mining business and worked at a mine in Colorado as an engineer, geologist. So that's kind of where my early days started in the high country of Colorado. You can sort of hear John Denver music playing in the background. But yeah, so he was in the mining business, and in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, when I was growing up as a child, the mining business in the United States and North America was changing quite a bit. And so we moved with different opportunities for him. And so that took us from Colorado to California, back to Colorado, to Montana, to Arizona, but really mostly in the Western United States.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So how did your father, being a geologist, and the kinds of activities that you grew up doing influence you when you were young?
Yeah, so we actually joke a little bit. So he's a geologist. He's not, I'm an engineer. And so we come from a family of engineers. So we always tease him a little bit about geology not being as tough as engineering. But he really sparked my love for science and curiosity and how things work growing up. So he was very actively involved in our science department and things like science fairs in school. He was our sponsor for our chess club for many years. So me and my brother played chess, and he just really engaged with our early childhood education. He also knew and saw, I'm a bit older than you, Amanda, that when personal computers started coming out, and I remember it was in the very early 80s when he bought us our first Apple IIe computer. And so he knew that there was this trajectory of where computing was going, and he wanted his children to learn that at a young age. So he got us a computer and sent us to programming class, and just always took the opportunity to keep us learning, whether or not that was in sort of our school curriculum or doing things externally. So he really did teach us from a very young age to enjoy science. Some of the other things that he did with us, so he worked for different mining companies, and he would take us in sometimes on the weekend to play in the lab. So they had neat labs where we could bring rocks that we would find in the desert in Arizona and then take them to his workplace, which as a kid, it's always fun to go to work with dad to just try to figure out what your father does. And we would do different things that were, kind of geology related with stuff that we would find in the Arizona desert. A lot of our different hypotheses on how things would work or which rocks were harder than others, simple things like that didn't quite pan out. But he always just championed us for that level of curiosity and learning and science and technology.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It seems like education and STEM were a big part of his focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us a bit about your educational path. I know that you moved back to Colorado for high school, found a love for chemistry and thermodynamics. How did that direct your educational journey going forward?
Yeah, so we moved back to Colorado when I was a freshman in high school, and they wanted us to be in a smaller school, really to kind of help my sister out. They felt that she would benefit from a smaller classroom size. So they put us into a small school that had a really unique science department that was fueled by a couple teachers that were just really passionate about science. And so they would gather as much equipment and different things together. And so that was actually really great. So I went to a small high school that was really had this kind of focus just because of the passion of a couple teachers around chemistry, physics, and we actually had a geology department there too that my dad sort of also helped support along the way. And that really created this environment where, like most kids, when you have a teacher that takes an interest in you and you start to do good at something. So I had a teacher, Sister Diane, we connected really well. She was a great chemistry teacher. Chemistry started to come to life in my mind, and she cheerleaded me along the way and, gave me different problems to solve. And I just felt like I was thriving. And so that was fantastic. So it was just that unique opportunity with her to find something that I was good at, that my brain understood, and that I could continue to learn and grow. And so I knew I wanted to do something math and maybe science related when I went to university. And she helped me kind of think about studying chemical engineering. So that really kind of turned into me going to the Colorado School of Mines and studying chemical engineering at that point.
That's so interesting. I'm sure the Colorado School of Mines was not or maybe it was, but a typical college experience when you think of one. So what was that experience like? Often when we talk to people in this industry, of course, it's that's a unique experience.
Yeah, so I tried not to go to the School of Mines. My sister was there, and it was really close to home. I think it was 12 and a half miles from our house, and most 18-year-olds want to go as far away as they possibly can to a university. But I went up and they have this thing called E-Days, or Engineering Days, in April, and they allow, prospective students to come and see what that's like. It's the one fun week of the year at a school that's very technical based. But I went up there and I met a lot of other people that were maybe similar to me. They were involved in other activities. So it wasn't just like completely, study based and the like, but there was like a lot of activity, but it had this really neat community to it. And it was in Colorado, which is it's kind of where I was born. And when you're from Colorado, it never leaves your heart or your soul. So it just felt kind of like home. And I was surrounded by kids that were kind of similar to me. They did similar activities, and I felt like it was a place that would really foster not only my technical development, my formal classroom training, but it offered me, because of its size and sort of uniqueness and this community atmosphere around it, it enabled me to get involved in athletics that I probably wouldn't have gotten involved in if I would have gone to a bigger Division I type school. So I was in cheerleading at Mines and did other recreational activities. I participated in our student government and was ultimately the student member of our board of trustees, as well as doing a lot of other things, a lot of other experiences from a technical perspective. So kind of looking back at it, it gave me a really well-rounded experience of not only kind of leadership, but around technical development, but then also a really great social environment to mature and grow up as well. So it worked out actually great for me in all of those ways.
Awesome. So when you graduated from the School of Mines, what did you want to do? Did you know what you wanted to do? What did you end up pursuing after?
So I had no idea what being a chemical engineer meant when I graduated from school. And I think when you talk to a lot of engineers, or maybe everybody, right? You go to school, you study something that you're interested in, and then you're faced with, okay, what am I going to do? And my parents, cut me out of the payroll the day that I graduated. So I absolutely had to go and make money straight away. But so I didn't have a great appreciation of it. And you start to get a flavor for it, of course, like you're seeing, through internships along the way. And then when you're considering different job opportunities, I think because we moved a lot growing up, I just became comfortable with sort of the unknown and different people and doing different things, which probably wasn't a natural trait for myself. It really fueled this curiosity of finding a job that gave me a lot of varied and varietal experiences. So, on one hand, you could go and work for a chemical company, a refiner, or a classic place where you'd see a chemical engineer or a process engineer, and you'd sort of bed down and go really deep in the science and work process of that specific company in that specific location. And that just didn't seem as exciting to me. And I wasn't quite ready to pick a specific industry to work with. And so through some family connections, my father suggested that I consider this company called Jacobs Engineering, and that they had never really hired kids out of school because they were more of an engineering consulting company. And a lot of our clients obviously hire people with expertise and knowledge, and I didn't have that expertise as of yet. But what was exciting is I could work in mining, I could work in refining, I could work in consumer goods, in manufacturing and pharmaceutical and the like. And maybe there was an opportunity because they were a global company to have the chance to move around and see different parts of the world. And so I was very fortunate. They asked if I wanted to work in Houston, Texas, or stay in Colorado. And I always enjoyed skiing. I like the mountains. No offense to Houston, but there's no mountains in Houston. And I did kind of like being near my family. So I took a role in Denver, which was a much smaller office. And that was another, like one of these decisions that you have in life that you don't realize the impact of it, but it's just kind of a why in the road. But I joined Denver where we only had maybe 100 people in the office. It was a small office that we were always fighting to stay in business, versus Houston where we had like maybe 1,500 people, very busy, very active. But that's where I started my career with Jacobs at that point in time.
All right. And I understand that ultimately led you to Coors Brewing.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So the Colorado School of Mines is in Golden, Colorado. Actually, the Coors Brewery, I don't know if it still does to this day, but at that time they used to supply heat for the university. So there was this direct relationship between the university and Coors. There were other relationships there as well. Actually, a member of the Coors family had been on our board of trustees for many years. But so Jacobs won a contract about a year after I started to do a lot of brewery modernization projects. So their facility in Golden, Colorado has been there since the late 1800s. And it's like one of the largest breweries, I think probably still to this day, certainly in North America, and probably sits up there on the top of the list worldwide. But yeah, we won an alliance agreement with them to help modernize their brewery in Golden and start looking at new technologies, whether that was automation or digital or new ways of filtering, packaging, cleaning processes and the like. And I was able to start working on that, series of programs with Coors. And I spent really 10 years of my career as a Jacobs employee, but helping Coors develop new technologies and implement them in their breweries, not only in Golden, but, elsewhere around the world.
Yeah. How did that experience kind of evolve into becoming kind of an international one?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I joked with some of actually I still connect with a lot of those folks at Coors. So I had been doing work for them for a couple years, and they took me under their wing as like a young woman coming out of school. I think a lot of them saw maybe, a mentorship with me. But after a couple of years of working with them, I had an opportunity with Jacobs to go work in the Netherlands for the summer. And so I remember going to my customer, which is kind of funny, and asking them permission to take a summer off from doing some project work. And we had a little bit of a lull in the summertime to go and work in our office in the Netherlands. So we had an office just outside of The Hague at Jacobs, and they were looking for process engineers to help out on a major series of programs for offshore gas platform design. And so I had raised my hand and said, hey, if there's ever a job overseas or you need help overseas, like I'm your girl, I'd love to go. And just by putting that out there to a couple key people in the company, next thing you know, I got a phone call and said, hey, do you want to come to the Netherlands and learn about offshore gas platform design, which I'll tell you is a lot different than some of the stuff that we were doing at Coors. But that was my first time moving abroad. And so I spent the better part of, I want to say 3 or 4 months in the Netherlands working with that team. So that was my first foray outside of the US as a professional engineer.
That's awesome. So how did your career internationally progress after that? I know you eventually ended up coming back to Philly. But before that, what kinds of different roles and positions were you doing around the world?
Yeah, so I came back after that brief stint many, many years ago. And then I took an opportunity actually to continue working with Coors. And we built a brewery for them in Virginia. So I moved actually to Greenville, South Carolina, which is where we were going to execute that project from. And I loved my time in the South. It was very culturally different than not only my short experience in the Netherlands, but certainly having spent a lot of my time in the Western U.S. and certainly Colorado. So I lived in Greenville for a while. I lived in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, which was absolutely beautiful. Kind of East Coast, but a little bit, not totally East Coast. I learned the difference when I moved to Philly. And then after that, there was an opportunity for me to move to the Netherlands for a much longer stint. So I was based in the Netherlands for about 2 years, working in a technology group. And what was neat about that was I had spent the better part of 10 years with Coors helping with new technology, seeing how we would scale that up and modernize some of their different facilities. And I learned a lot about different construction methodologies, technology, innovation, and the like. And it really helped me in the role that I took when I moved to the Netherlands, where we had our own technology as Jacobs in a completely different industry back in the oil and gas business, but doing sulfur recovery. And so I took a lot of what I learned from doing projects with Coors over and over again for 10 years to that group in the Netherlands. And so although I was based in the Netherlands, all of my customers and projects were outside of the Netherlands. I had a few in Western Europe, a lot of projects in the Middle East, in China, in Scandinavia and Finland, the UK, Czech Republic, all over the place. So it was really neat to always be working in a different culture in a different part of the world when I was based there. And so then from the Netherlands, I moved back to Philly. So that's when I came back to the US. That was a great landing point when I think about it, after living in Europe for a couple of years, to come back to the East Coast and experience that culture. So I was in Philly for 4 years at that time. Yeah.
And what were you doing in Philly?
So Philly, I actually came back because I had spent that time doing technology work in the Netherlands, and I actually moved into a full-time business development role for the company, which as an engineer, I would have never thought that I would have loved sales, right? A lot of people give sales a bad rap. But what was neat about that was, based on all that project experience that I had, really thinking about how we better solve problems for our clients and really help them add value to what they're doing. That was really exciting. And so I was presented an opportunity to work in business development, particularly in consumer products and manufacturing. That played off of my experience with Coors. But we also had a lot of modular design that we were doing in the pharmaceutical world. So we were just starting to see this vaccine wave pick up, which at this point, in 2023, thinking about a world where vaccines were not, the most topical thing with pharmaceutical companies, it's kind of like, how did that world ever exist? But anyway, we were helping them look at different ways to build pharmaceutical facilities, vaccines in particular, so we could do those more quickly for them. So that was kind of my focus in Philadelphia, was learning business development and a little bit about the pharmaceutical world.
All right. Another pivot. So before we get to your current, how you got to your current job, I do understand that you left that position to take an opportunity elsewhere. Tell us a bit about that. What happened after 4 years in Philly?
Yeah. So I'll try to be a little bit quick on this. So from Philly, I told a couple of my mentors and sponsors I wanted to move west of the Mississippi. I think I literally said that. And I thought they knew I wanted to come back to Colorado. I thought that was really the obvious answer. But they didn't see that was the obvious answer. And so they sent me to Australia. So we were in the process of acquiring a company, and they said, hey, so West, that's great. What do you think about moving to Melbourne, Australia, and helping us with an integration and really understanding how our business operates and driving cultural integration, et cetera, et cetera. So I've spent about 3 years in Australia.
Wow.
Some of the hardest and funnest work I've ever done, and an amazing experience to move down under and then, work across a global enterprise is just, it was fantastic. When that was up, they did get me back to the West Coast of the West Coast. And I moved to Vancouver, Canada. And I spent the better part of 4 years in Vancouver, helping drive sales transformation in the organization. I did a short stint in running sales for our mining and minerals and consumer products group. And then from Vancouver, the call to headquarters came. And I moved to Dallas just before the pandemic in 2019. And I've been based in Dallas pretty much ever since.
Amazing. So the reason why I kind of wanted to take our audience through your professional journey so specifically was because I think the podcast Humble Beginnings, of course, it's about where you came from, how you grew up, things like that. But you took on so many different roles. Your willingness to travel around the world, around the country, experience new things, try fields that had nothing to do with chemical engineering, sales, experience an M&A type environment. I think that it's so interesting, and I think it speaks a lot about who you are professionally, because I don't think many people would take so many twists and turns and try so many new things. So thank you for taking us through that. Also, I think it's coming from Ouray. I live in Colorado now, and I've been to Ouray many times. Fell in love with Ouray. I didn't know actually that's where you were from. And we were going to Telluride for the very first time, and we didn't know where to stay. We couldn't afford to stay in Telluride, so we found Ouray,
Yeah.
and we have gone back purposefully multiple. It's our favorite place to go. So that's so cool that that's where you're from. But
that's awesome. Well, I don't know if our house is still there, but you're in such a small town on the south side of town, right before you leave town.
Okay.
The house on the corner was the house that I was born in. And I think it's still there because I looked it up on Google Maps. Yeah. I mean, these small mining towns in Colorado, they don't change too much over time, and you're geographically bound. But
You hope they don't.
gorgeous.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to look for it next time we go because it's just a beautiful place. But to think that that's where you came from and you've experienced all these different cultures and places, 'cause it's pretty remote in Ouray. It's not that easy to get to.
It's not. Like, people always ask me, I always describe it. It's like, do you know, you've seen the Maroon Bells and Ansel Adams, but as the crow flies, you can get there from Aspen, right? You see the Maroon Bells from the Aspen side, but to get to Ouray, you have to intentionally work to make it happen. Here's another fun fact. C.W. McCall is like a really famous 70s folk singer. He was the mayor of Ouray, Colorado. And so anyway, if you like that whole area, the song Convoy is C.W. McCall, but he and my dad were friends growing up, and we used to go jeeping in the mountains and camping when I was a real little tiny girl with him. So that's my only real claim to fame of knowing a music artist in any sort of way.
That's awesome. What a fun way to grow up. That's so cool. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing. I just wanted to note that because not many people know where Ouray is, and I would have never known. And it's like what made us want to move. I mean, we live in Denver, but to be in proximity is amazing. Yeah. So anyways, so considering you took so many pivots in different directions, you even took some positions that some may have looked at as a lateral move just for experience. And as an observer, when you look at where you are today, I would have never guessed that was the path that you took, especially after interviewing so many professionals in GovCon. And there's a bit more that makes sense in terms of the jobs they've had. So what do you attribute these opportunities to? What characteristics about yourself or about the way that you grew up kind of made you say yes and take on opportunities that others may have, passed up?
Yeah. And just to complete some of the rest of the career story for people that are following along. So then after kind of sales, I got the call to help run human resources, which was probably the biggest, people really, and I hung up twice on, he's now our CEO of Jacobs. When he called me, he and I have known each other since when I lived in Philly and worked with him. And when he called me to come and be his HR partner for the part of the business that he was running, I literally hung up on him twice. And it was like, you called the wrong person. Like, I know I do a lot of strange things, but human resources, I know nothing about it. And then even after HR, I took on a role running enterprise risk management for the company. So anyway, very varied. But I guess back to your question, when I look back, I think there's a few things. I think there is this element. Most people would not describe me as an introverted person, but moving and just changing schools when you're a kid sort of forces you out of your shell. And I had to learn to find, I think I learned to find excitement in being a little bit scared and having to figure things out. I almost made it a game for myself when we would go somewhere or try something new. And it did push me a little bit out of my comfort zone. And it taught me how to connect dots that made me feel comfortable that weren't necessarily obvious. And so for a lot of reasons, I'm thankful that my parents gave me, that we had these opportunities to move around a bit. I mean, albeit just within the US, but as a child, that was kind of formative. And so I got really comfortable with, and again, I probably gamified it in my own mind around the unknown, uncertainty, and then different, finding things that are different and then trying to connect dots back to each other in order to find safety or security in that in some way, shape, or form. So all of that stuff going on as a kid, I think really helped me. The other thing that I think is really important is when I joined my company, we did not have, certainly in this small office in Denver, Colorado, we had very few, almost no other graduate engineers in the company. So I was junior by not a little bit, but by a lot. I was also, at that point in the workforce, there weren't a lot of women.
Right.
you're still sort of faced with people hiring like for like, and the most experienced person, which for me to become the most experienced person to be considered for that next job up was literally going to take like 20, 25 years. I joked with myself that I needed to start wearing glasses and dye my hair gray so people might think that I was older than I was. And I'm an impatient person. So I do like trying things new all the time. And so like that kind of perfect storm of me feeling like, I'm not the first, second, or third person that's going to get that promotion just because we were promoting based on experience. And, I was, it was just a different work dynamic at the time. My impatience and my thirst to kind of learn and be comfortable with different things pushed me to just always find something new and exciting to do. Like the idea of sitting in the same office, doing the same job for, many, many years just didn't excite me. So those were like kind of key traits that I think really fueled me to put myself out there more so than I probably would have naturally done had I not kind of been brought up the way that I was brought up. I also learned that nothing is really a life sentence. Like you can go and do instrumentation engineering or work in procurement or go do construction engineering support. And that's just like the job of today. That's not going to be the job for the rest of your life. And so I got excited about just trying and learning different things and just keeping busy. So I think that helped as well. And maybe I'm not good at saying no. I've debated this in my I've debated this in my mind. There's two schools of thought, right? One is like, be very selective so people know that you've got a plan and you're sticking to your plan and you've thought it out and you're executing your plan. That's not really me. Or there's the like, just say yes and see what happens. And then you can always like try to find your way out another direction. I probably subscribe to the default yes camp instead of the sort of default no, and find the good in something. And as long as there's something that you're learning and whatever it is that you're going to do, I actually don't think it can be a bad choice. So I don't know. Did that kind of?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, picturing someone camping, growing up in the Rocky Mountains, taking the Jeeps into the dirt roads. I don't really picture that person sitting in one desk for, the entirety of their career. So it kind of makes sense. You'd want to explore and get out there and, and you've been able to do this all within one company for your whole career. It's unusual.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is unusual. It is. But I do like when I talk to people, I feel like I've had 6 careers and probably worked for 6 companies just because when you move to a different location, it's different in each one. So,
yeah, definitely. It's also interesting. A lot of people we talk to in this industry, they grew up around government contracting, their parents or aunts and uncles or from the DMV, and you kind of see that world and grow up around that, but you didn't. So did you ever think, growing up and your father being a geologist and being so ingrained in the STEM world that you would be where you are today?
No, I don't think, I really don't. But I also don't think that I'm the biggest plan-aheader on the planet, right? So no, and I'm so thrilled that Jacobs and my career have worked out the way that it has. I think it's a symbiotic relationship because our company has completely morphed and changed in the almost 25 years that I've worked here. And me as an individual, I have completely morphed and changed along the way over 25 years, spending 4 years working in human resources as somebody who's had like an engineering, sales, and business operations background. Like if that doesn't change you as a human being, I don't know what else does, right? Because it gives a completely different perspective on the world. And then working in all these different cultures, like if you don't think that, finding yourself in China for 6 months working, on a gas plant is not going to open your eyes to different ways of doing work or a different perspective on society or government or politics or social or anything like that. You're kind of silly too. So it's kind of neat. I actually enjoy that both the company that I work for has really changed and transformed over the years. And I found a way that it's really helped me. And I've kind of leaned into the opportunity for it to change and help me develop as a human being. But if you would have asked me if I would be leading a unit that we have about 3,000 professionals that work in cyber and intelligence, That's not an area of my expertise, but it's amazing work that our people do. Like I wouldn't have said that I would be helping lead that team to success and driving a culture where we leverage their expertise around data and digital to solve big problems for our customers all around the world. I would have told you, wow, whoever has that job is really lucky, because that is like a really cool job. And now that I have that job, some days I have to remind myself, it's like, Shannon, that's your job, right? Like, that's kind of cool. So no, but I'm excited, and who knows where it's going to take me in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it could literally be anywhere. You could be across the country again. We don't know.
I might be doing a podcast where I'm interviewing you, Amanda.
There you go. Yeah, I feel like journalism is one area maybe you're missing. Incorporate that.
Totally.
That's right. And this is just a random question. I'm just curious. Do you and your dad or like parents talk about? Is he still a geologist? Is that still something that you guys connect about, or I'm just curious about your parents. Yeah.
Yeah. So they actually, I'm very fortunate that I have amazing parents that are here right now in Dallas. They come down and spend a bit of time with me. Often they leave Colorado in the winter when it's cold, and they come to Dallas when the weather looks like it's going to be a bit better. So we still talk a lot about science and things. My dad is in his late 70s now.
Okay.
And is, I would say, mostly retired. He still has a lot of hobbyist projects and friends that are still doing things. So he's still working on some exploration projects around the world. And then we talk a lot about work. He reads a lot. He reads a ton. And so he's always asking me about, where the company's going and different technology things. And I'm always impressed with how much he consumes and digests about what Jacobs is doing and what projects we're working on. And my mom is also always excited about it, because she's become accustomed to, when we see big projects or big programs or anything that's sort of related to engineering and science, 9 times out of 10, it's Jacobs has had some connection with what's going on. And so I know that makes her really proud, because she can visualize all the neat things that we do at the company too. So she gets in the middle of it also, which is pretty fun.
Awesome. Well, Shannon, to close, I'm curious if you have any advice for young professionals in this field hoping to reach, similar heights or a similar exploration, looking to move around, try new things in their career.
So I would say, don't worry about, I would say yes. I do believe this sort of default open, hear people out. So when people, and I hung up on Bob, like I said before, our CEO a couple of times when he called me about human resources. So that probably wasn't my most open of days. He actually caught me when I was on what I thought was a much needed vacation. And so I was trying to get some R&R,
Mm-hmm.
but, so I probably didn't really default open at that time. But anyway, from there, I socialized it with a lot of my key sponsors and people that knew me, and they gave me good career advice. And so I think that's just important. So be open to opportunities, people that you know and trust and know you and care about your career. It might sound sort of left field or a bit harebrained, but hear them out and think about what the opportunity is. The other thing is it's not getting promoted and climbing the ladder the fastest. I don't think is necessarily the only way to go about a great career journey. The way I describe it to people is, if you build the widest runway that you can through early career experiences, the biggest jet plane can take off. So if you're just focused on a narrow, quick shoot, that's a different career trajectory than gaining a lot of experience early on in your career. And then figuring out where you want to go deeper into something is kind of another piece. Now, I will say you have to temper that with, you've got to have an area of subject matter expertise, an area that you do have the depth. And so I was always able to find those areas where I had the depth of experience and knowledge in something, and then I built off of that in my next career step. So I think there's an important balance there as well.
Yeah, a quick follow-up. I forgot to ask, I was thinking about when you mentioned you were one of very few female engineers when you first joined, and I'm sure that's changed a bit, but I think it's still like that sometimes. So how did you work through that, and as you progressed in your career, how did you work around that and through that to take on the opportunities that you did?
Yeah, so I can't say every day was like, the funnest day ever and that I didn't get frustrated, right? But what I found over time is one, and I think this is gender independent, as somebody who's young and has ideas and is trying to like find their way into the conversation and to wade in, learning to sort of trust your gut and find the right time to chime in early on and add value is like an art. And, you can layer that on when you're different from the group of people that you're sitting at a table. That's harder to find your way. It's maybe less embracing. It's a slightly colder pool to jump into or wade into than others. And so, that could be gender, it could be race, it could be culture, it could be background, et cetera. So just getting comfortable with your sort of inner voice and then being able to express your thought is important. I think what I did find, and you always have to find your strength or your superpower, is when I sat in a room with all men, they were probably more afraid of how they were interacting with me than I was with them. Like I became very comfortable being the only female and the youngest female by, a very large amount. And they were more uncomfortable with me than I probably was with them. And there's a little bit of I don't want to say game you can play with that, but you can have a little bit of fun with that in your mind, right? And you realize that at the end of the day, what I really did realize is when people started telling me, Shannon, when a woman or when you're in the room, the conversation is just different. And when that became good and a positive, it was like, all right, keep going, because it's having an impact on how the team thinks and cooperates. And we all know, all the data says that diverse teams, cognitive diversity, physical diversity, cultural diversity, drives better problem solvers. You come up with a better answer at the end of the day. That data was not front and center,
right.
back when I was really working. But when you started to hear people comment on that, they're like, you know what? It's a different conversation when you're in the room or someone else like you is in the room. That gave me a lot of like fuel to keep going. And I think that's important. The other thing is I think it is just important to have those mentors, sponsors, confidence, people that, see it from a different perspective and can help cheerlead you and champion you along the way. I think that that's really important too. It's actually funny when I moved to Philly, like we talked about earlier, I had gotten so used to in my career, working with all men. And then when I moved to Philly and I joined a sales organization, which it wasn't all technical people, I was really uncomfortable working in a team of women. It took me years to get comfortable with that dynamic. So it just, some of it just becomes what you get used to over time versus the other.
Yeah. Just like, no, you're making a positive impact when you're in the room. That's nice.
Yeah. And again, I'm fortunate, both of my parents, to have your father say, you can do any job. You can be the CEO, you can be the board of directors. If you want to be the president of the United States and that's your aspiration, you can do it. I think it's so important that we remind ourselves, especially as adults like you and me, that we continue to carry that message on, because I really did always, I think there's probably an element of me that has a small amount of imposter syndrome to a certain extent. People talk about that a lot, but I have never told myself I can't do that, because so much as a child, I was told I can do whatever I put my mind to and whatever I desire to do. And that's, I think, it's a really important thing to remember.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a beautiful note to end on.
Perfect.
Shannon, it has been really fun and inspiring and cool, for lack of a better word, to speak with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll see you in your Ray one day. We'll run into each other.
Oh, I know. That would be fabulous. Right? Fabulous.
Yeah. I love it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Beginnings. Check out WashingtonExec.com to find more of our podcasts and profiles on executives. See you next time.